Hello and welcome back to my studio. Today I'll be showing you how I painted this particular sky practice here. And I'm really excited to share with you as well my top 5 watercolour tips for painting skies. But first, a quick plug for my book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's now available to purchase online from all good bookstores, and I'm really pleased that a couple of months ago it already went for its first reprint, and I've had some lovely comments from people that are really enjoying it. So now on with the demo. The first thing I'll do before I get into the tips is just to sketch out a really simple scene. For a sky practice, I'm focusing completely on the sky. If I do any kind of land or sea, it's just really to back up the sky, or rather to put the sky into context. So I'm putting in a horizon line, a little bit of a headland, and then a bit of beach. I live near the sea, and nearly all my sky practices are focused around sort of coastal scenes, and particularly little sort of beachscapes or seascapes, because where I live, when the storm clouds sort of blow in across the water towards land, it's really spectacular, and it's something that never ceases to inspire me. So tip number 1, when you wet the sky, don't just wet the sky, paint the sky that you plan to paint with those brush strokes, and then you are preparing the page and also practicing your sky with clean water first. And this way you'll be able to see where you need to paint when you start to add colour to the page. So tip number 1, practice painting your sky as you wet your paper. Tip number 2, always use plenty of rich paint to paint your sky, even if you're painting subtler effects than those that I'm painting now. Watercolour always dries lighter, and of course we're painting wet in wet, so the water on the page will dilute our paint even further. So tip number 2, always use plenty of rich paint. Tip number 3, always use the largest possible wash brush when you're painting a sky. That means you'll use the smallest amount of brush strokes, and that will keep your sky looking really fresh. And make sure you use all of your brush, the tip, the belly of the brush, the corners. You get different shapes and brush strokes from each part of the brush, and that's all you really need for your sky. So I'm using a Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch Mottler, and I'm using Milford cold press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board, and my board's at an angle of about 20 degrees tilt. The colours that I'm using for my sky today are Payne's Grey, Sepia, Indigo and some cobalt blue, which I'm just placing in and around the storm clouds now, keeping my brush strokes mostly sort of horizontally oriented. And tip number 4, always stop just before you think it's finished. Remember, with a wet in wet sky like this, there's lots of softening and diffusing to be done as it dries. So as soon as you've placed your brush strokes and it's looking okay, step away from it. And don't touch it anymore, because if you start to fiddle, you'll spoil the freshness of your sky. So that's tip number 4, step away just before you think it's finished. And that brings me to my last tip for today. Tip number 5 is perhaps the most important. Practice your skies as often as you can. It's only through regular practice that we can improve, and loose skies might look quite simple, but they can actually be quite tricky, which is why it's very important to practice and not to try to create finished paintings all the time, but to focus some time on just using the backs of old paintings or your sketchbook to practice skies as much as possible, and of course to have plenty of fun. So for those of you wanting the sky tips, that's all of them done now. So if you want to go back and watch those through again, then please feel free, because now all I'll be doing is just adding a little bit of beach and a bit of water below those storm clouds in order to sort of add just a bit of context. I'm using the same colours, the same brushes, perhaps just using a 3/4 inch flat brush every now and again to sort of soften areas back. Still mostly keeping my brush strokes pretty much horizontal. It keeps the sea flat. And this is my size 14 Escoda Perla round brush, and I'm putting in my distant headland. And just a quick bonus tip, try not to be too much of a perfectionist when you paint your skies. I think it's really important just to kind of let go, experiment, to try and consider where you want your darker clouds, and then to try and bring some sort of sense of perspective into the sky by painting smaller clouds near to the horizon. So you've got your large clouds overhead, and then your clouds sort of diminish as they go further back. This gives you plenty of depth and distance in your sky. And another bonus tip, expect for a lot of your skies not to work out. With my skies, probably about 1 in 5 or 6 work out the way I like them, and I think that's pretty much sort of an average of how it goes. So don't be concerned if every single one of your sky practices for a while don't work out, because it needs practice. You need to get used to the water and paint ratios in your brushes, in your paint mixtures, and of course on your paper as well. And nobody can fully explain to you how to do this in a way so that you can just walk over to your easel and paint a perfect sky. Sadly, with watercolour, it's quite a sort of fickle medium, although it is the most beautiful medium, I think. But it is something that you really have to work at, learning all its sort of foibles and learning to work with them and not against them. So I'm just finishing off and linking the land with the sky with 3 birds painted in with my rigger brush. And I think I'm going to call that finished for my sky practice. And while it's not perfect, I really don't mind that. I'm very happy with the freshness of it. It's not overworked, even if maybe the beach area and the land and sea is a little overworked, but I'm not too worried about that. For me, the sky is the important thing, and I really like the contrasts here, the wispiness of the clouds and the strength of those darker clouds sweeping in from the distance. If you enjoyed this video, then I have a playlist for more sky practices that you may find interesting. And if you did enjoy the video, or if you found it helpful, then please leave us a like. And if you're new here, welcome to our channel, and I hope you'd consider subscribing because it really does help us with the YouTube algorithm. And thank you so much to everybody that supports our channel on Patreon. We couldn't run the channel without you, and we really do appreciate you. I'll see you again soon. Happy sky practice and happy painting. Bye.